Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest this week is Baroque flautist Stephen Schultz, who's going to speak about hearing loss and how to overcome it. But let's start here. In February, the content identification company PEX published a study that analyzed 100 million audio tracks on TikTok, and they found that 38% of all these songs on the platform were speed or pitch modified in 2023. Not only that, PEX estimated that the share of speed modified tracks on TikTok is increasing by a lot, up from 24% in 2022 to 38% in 2023. Now here's where it gets a little crazy. In a bid to compete with the popularity of this kind of modified audio on TikTok, Spotify is reportedly working on a feature that could let its users create sped up or slowed down versions of songs. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, which reported that Spotify is hoping that the plan will appeal to young users while generating new revenue for artists. The difference is that music isn't standing alone so much on TikTok as it's a soundtrack for the videos. So if something is sped up, it's mostly in support of the video. Also, many people are trying to evade any kind of copyright protection by speeding up a song. The problem is, artists don't see money when that happens. But Spotify claims that that won't be the case on its platform. The journal's sources also said that music right holders would be paid for these sped up or slowed down streams on the platform. Now, the thing about it is, radio has been speeding up songs for decades in order to fit more music in between commercials, but there was never a problem about paying anybody for it because everything was logged. We knew exactly what songs were played and exactly when they were played. If I'm an artist, I'm not too happy about this, to be honest with you. Artists spend a lot of time finding just the right tempo for a song, and the flow and feel of a song is altered with the speed. This is just another attempt by a streaming platform to copy TikTok's success without really understanding why the feature is popular in the first place. Not only that, Spotify expects its users to pay extra for this feature, so in the end it misses the point altogether. Either way, look for some big changes coming to Spotify in terms of features and pricing soon. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. Also, I'm pleased to announce that my new Musician's AI Handbook is now available. It's packed with information about how AI can help you with new song, lyric, mixing, and mastering ideas, as well as music marketing to help you get your music out to the audience that you deserve. To get your copy, go to bobbyowsinski.com/AI Handbook. That's bobbyowsinski.com/AI Handbook. You can also find it on Amazon and Apple Books. Now, I get a lot of press releases for music gear, and it could be any kind of musical instrument or audio piece or any kind of software like plugins. But there's fewer and fewer of these products coming out these days. There's fewer hardware products being released, there's fewer plugins from established developers, and there's a lot less new products in general. So what are the reasons? Well, it turns out that music gear sales have been steadily declining over the last 18 months or so, mostly because consumers are spending their money elsewhere. For instance, in 2023, spending on air travel was up by 36%. Concert ticket sales were up by about 15%, and spending at restaurants jumped 11%. Now, the estimated retail for new instruments and audio products, print music, recording gear, anything like that actually declined, so that was down by 4.2%. The scary part about this is in 2023, there was a glut of products left over from the pandemic, so much so that there wasn't enough warehouse space to store anything new. That meant that there was a lot of great deals offered to dealers and the public just to clear out the inventory. Now that things are back to normal, prices will be back to normal as well. But probably the biggest reason that there hasn't really been a new breakthrough music product in many, many years. Most new products today are just a rehash of popular products from decades ago. There are new variations of guitars and keyboards, and microphones, preamps, and sound systems. It's the same for plugins, although we have seen some new AI-driven processors hit the market in the last year or so. Musicians love gear and will gladly pay for many versions of the same thing, but we might now be seeing the limits of that spending. Gear acquisition syndrome, or GAS, is a real thing, but there's not nearly as many reasons to get fired up to make a trip to the music store as there once was. My guest this week is Stephen Schultz, who, besides being an expert flautist specializing in Baroque flute, is an associate teaching professor in music history and flute at Carnegie Mellon University and director of the Carnegie Mellon Baroque Orchestra. Stephen is also an advocate for hearing protection for all musicians, as he's learned to overcome his personal difficulties with hearing loss. Many people falsely identify hearing loss with rock musicians, but the fact is that 52% of classical musicians have some degree of permanent hearing damage, as opposed to only 30% of rock musicians. There is a solution, though, as the latest generation of hearing aids are now so sophisticated that musicians can now wear them without any impediments to their playing, which so many high-profile musicians are doing, so that the stigma of wearing hearing aids is now greatly diminished. During our interview, Stephen and I spoke about discovering he had a hearing problem, finding the right hearing aids for music, why some orchestral members suffer from hearing loss, advice on looking for the right pair, and so much more. I spoke with Stephen via Zoom from his home in Pittsburgh. Let's start with your background, because it's very interesting from what I could see, and I'm sure there's more to the story.
Sure. The background as far as when I started playing flute, or background as far as the hearing?
No. As far as you playing flute.
Wow. Well, 9 years old. It was fourth grade, and I wanted to learn how to play an instrument. And I thought saxophone was a really cool instrument, so I put saxophone down as number one. I like the clarinet too, so I said clarinet number two, and I didn't know what to put for a third one, so I put flute. So at the audition, I don't know if you remember this from your experience, they stick a saxophone in your mouth and then a clarinet. I couldn't make any sound on the reeds, and they put a flute up there, and I made a little noise. They said, "Okay, you're going to play flute." So that's how that started. My father was totally into classical music when I was growing up, and dragged me to concerts. I think my first concert I went to, I was 4 or 5 years old or something. So I had music around me constantly growing up. So that was kind of, it was great. At the time, I thought, I'm kind of sick of opera. My father loved opera. But it was a really, really good background for me. So there was always music in the house growing up, and I started playing the flute when I was 9 years old. I started on the normal, silver concert flute that you see in an orchestra. But in my teens, specifically, I was about 18 years old, I heard a recording of a Baroque flute, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's what the flute looked like in the 18th century. It was made out of wood, kind of like a recorder, but it's played like a flute. Mm-hmm. And there's one key on the end. And I just fell in love with the sound. And there was only 2 places in the world where you could learn how to play that at the time. One was in Holland and one was in Switzerland. So I decided to go to Holland. And I studied there for 6 years. I got a degree on my regular flute, modern flute, but the last 2 years I was there, I studied Baroque flute. And when I graduated and came back to America in the 80s, I pretty much have exclusively just played wooden flute, period instruments. So that's kind of how I started with that.
Did you start teaching right away?
I started teaching when I was teaching to make a living in Holland. I was basically on scholarship there. I think the tuition for the Royal Conservatory in The Hague was like $50 a year. So it's pretty affordable. But I had to make a living. So I taught privately. But as far as teaching in an institution, that started when I came back to America in the early 80s. I started teaching at the San Francisco Conservatory, moved on to UC Davis, Holy Names College, and eventually wound up at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, where I've been teaching for 22 years. So yeah, I was teaching along the same, career as I was performing.
Okay, you went to teach to a number of schools.
Yes.
And that's not the norm. Usually someone will begin to teach at one place and stay there for the majority of their career, and they might move, once, but you've moved quite a lot.
You're diving into my deep, dark past here. The reason I didn't stay anywhere was because I got let go at so many different places. Yeah. I was at the Conservatory in San Francisco for 5 years, and then they decided, well, we have to reshuffle some things, and we're getting a new flute teacher. Let's give him Stephen's job. So that happened. Then I was studying at UC Davis. And I was hired by a very sweet man who heard me playing a concert, and I taught for 5 years until he was no longer the chairman. And then there was some political machinations, and he wasn't chairman, so I lost my job. Holy Names with nuns, they loved me, apparently. I stayed there for 7 years, and I didn't lose my job, but I got the job at Carnegie Mellon. So that's how that started. And I've been there for 22 years very happily. So that's why I jumped around a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I have some friends, though, that are at major universities, and they never complain about the teaching, but they complain about the politics quite a lot.
Oh, it's the worst. I mean, that's the one downside, besides grading midterms and grading papers, and finals. Yeah, the politics is horrible. And that's another reason that I was jumping around a lot. I didn't know how to play the game initially. I was just there to teach, and I didn't realize I had to say hi to people and stuff like that.
Yeah, right.
But I learned my lesson, and so I can play the political game. But a lot of people hate it, and I understand it. It's like I try to stay as far away from all the politics as possible.
I saw, I guess, on your website that you produced and or edited 40 CDs.
Actually, I didn't do that much. Actually, I played on about 65 CDs now as a musician, and about maybe 15 or so as far as producing. Yeah, not really engineering. I'm more on the producer side as far as, telling people to play the right notes at the right time and stuff like that. And I usually hire people that are actually engineers that know what they're doing to set up microphones.
Let's talk about hearing problems. And I'm surprised, after doing a little research, that so many orchestral musicians have a problem, or classical musicians have a problem with that, because you usually associate hearing problems with loud rock bands.
Right. That's what I thought too. So my hearing issues started around 2004. One of the classes I teach at Carnegie Mellon is the Beatles, one of my favorite classes to teach, for 200 students. So I'm in these huge halls. And I started noticing in 2004 that, inevitably there was a student way in the back asking a question really softly. I couldn't understand what they were saying. So I would have to walk up there and stuff. But it got to the point where I thought, well, I better get my ears checked. And I went to the audiologist, and indeed, my hearing had a classical pattern, the audiogram of what's called otosclerosis. I don't know if you know what that is.
No.
That's the three little bones in your ear, the hammer, anvil, and the stirrup. The stirrup, also called the stapes, is the smallest bone in your body. It's connected to the cochlea, and it vibrates into the shell-like thing with all the hairs. It sends a signal to your brain for hearing. And what happens with otosclerosis is it becomes calcified, and a bone grows on it, and so it stops vibrating. It's actually what Beethoven had, apparently, they think, though they don't know exactly. It's a hereditary disease, usually passed on in females. So I know my maternal grandmother had it, all my aunts had it, and my mom had it. And one of my uncles had it, but, I thought, who cares,
Yeah.
I got the diagnosis and was told that there's nothing I could do about it, that eventually I would need hearing aids. And so I went into about 3 or 4 years of total denial, saying, I'm not going to wear hearing aids.
Yeah.
What's that going to look like? What's that going to do in my career? But it got to the point when I decided I really needed them. And so I started wearing them in 2008. And I had much longer hair then, and so nobody knew. So I was fine with that. And it really, really helped. I went through many different brands of hearing aids. The thing about hearing aids is that they're built for speaking. They're built for understanding voices. They're not really built for instruments. And specifically, it's really hard with the flute because, the flute is right up there against your mouth. And when you blow, it really feeds back into the hearing aids. So I had to go through a bunch of different types of hearing aids and spend a lot of time with my audiologist to sort of tweak it to get a really natural sound on the wooden flute, but also to be able to hear what the conductor says. Most of the time, you actually want to hear what the conductor says, not all the time.
Yeah, right.
So I went through a bunch of different hearing aids, and it worked out fine. I finally got to this, the level of a hearing aid. The brand is called Widex, and it's fantastic. They have a built-in music program that's really great. And my audiologist and I tweaked it for about a couple hours. I brought my flute in and played it, and now I'm at a point where I have a really good program that I use when I play the flute, and it works really, really well. I was shy about it when I cut my hair, and it was obviously noticeable that I have something in my ears. But, my colleagues were pretty cool about it and didn't really say anything about it. I did come out, as so to speak, out of the closet this year, as I guess you've found out about, and decided not to be shy about it anymore. I mean, I've been wearing them for, how many years do I have it here? 15 years. And it hasn't affected my career. It hasn't affected me being hired. It hasn't affected my performance. And so I thought, why not? And as you mentioned at the beginning, it's amazing. The minute I came out of the closet and articles started coming out about me, all these people are contacting me. Oh, yeah, I have hearing loss. Oh, yeah, I've been shy about it. Oh, yeah, I've been playing in an orchestra for 10 years and, my hearing is terrible. You asked about orchestras. The thing is, it's not like playing in a rock band, but if you're a wind player, flute section and then bassoons and clarinets, you're right in front of the brass and percussion. So, I don't know if you've noticed, but at some concerts they have these kind of, shielding, plastic shielding that helps. But for many, many years, people didn't use that. And so their hearing has been affected at different ranges, highs and lows and stuff. So people are now, finally admitting that there is hearing loss in classical world. And, I encourage people as much as I can to don't go into 4 years of denial like I did and, get checked out. It's important.
I remember talking to Quincy Jones, and this was quite a while ago. And the reason why Quincy stopped making records is because of his hearing. But I remember talking to him, and he says, I just came back from, I want to say the Mayo Clinic, but that might not be it. But he was telling me, and I have these new hearing aids, and I can even go back to mixing records now. And he didn't, but he felt he could. And I also understand that George Martin, speaking of the Beatles, that's one of the reasons why he stopped and actually got his son involved.
Yeah, Giles, exactly.
Giles, Giles was his ears.
Yeah, he first admitted that, I guess, that Cirque du Soleil show in Vegas called Love, that Giles and George Martin mixed 90 minutes of Beatles music to go along with the Cirque show. And that they did a documentary on that. And that was the first time I actually heard about George Martin losing his hearing, for sure. So yeah, it happens to the best of us, certainly. But yeah, I mean, hearing aids can help. I'm glad that, Quincy Jones was able to find hearing aids. It really depends on, the brand. And there's the state of the art with hearing aids now is just phenomenal. There are, a few really good brands, mostly in Scandinavia for some reason. I don't know why. And they all have their different, range of models, but all the high-end models are really good, and they all kind of work for flute. But like I said, I'm not trying to plug Widex too much here in this, but that's what works for me. Absolutely. So, the great thing about hearing aids is that you get 30 days trial and you money back kind of guarantee and stuff. So it's just important that if you are experiencing hearing loss as a musician, you actually go physically with your instrument into the audiologist and play, because they have so many parameters, like on your Pro Tools that you were just talking about, that they can tweak, raise this, lower this. And, it's amazing. I'm not upset anymore about my hearing loss. Initially, it was like, oh my God, what's going to happen to my career? But I'm really happy that, there are hearing aids now that work great.
Steve Lukather was going to come on and talk about Widex because he's using those now.
Oh, right. Yeah, I noticed that on their website that yeah.
And we couldn't connect for some reason, but anyway, I know he was a big proponent of it.
Yeah. And like I said, that brand might not work for everybody, but for my hearing loss and for my needs as a flute player, it's a match made in heaven. It's the Rolls Royce of hearing aids as far as I'm concerned.
Can you hear the student in the back of the room now?
Well, unfortunately, yes. So I don't know how familiar you are with hearing aids, but there are different programs you can put in them. So I have a specific one for playing the flute. There's also a specific one for teaching in large classrooms. And there's specific ones for going to restaurants, which is always a challenge. The background in restaurants, even for people without hearing loss, is pretty significant. So that's the hardest thing, actually, when you're going out in the world with hearing aids. But I haven't had any negative feedback, at least to my face, about coming out of the closet. So I'm really happy that I did. And, I went to a party, I guess, about a month ago, and about 3 or 4 people came up to me and said, oh, we saw the article, and they immediately wanted advice. I spent the rest of the party giving hearing aid advice to people, which is great. I'm really happy to do it. But as you said, there are a lot more people out there, especially in the classical world, that are not dealing with their hearing loss.
So are you feeling that there's no stigma now, or less of a stigma? And it's not so much wearing hearing aids. I think there always was one to some degree if you wore hearing aids, but for a musician especially, it's like, well, if you can't hear, you can't play.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I can answer that properly, because when I started wearing them 15 years ago, nobody knew about it. So I didn't feel like I had a stigma. The only people that knew about it was obviously my wife and my close family and stuff. And now that I am out about it, I don't feel like there's any stigma anymore. I mean, it's weird because, I grew up, looking at somebody, a disabled person, or I don't know if that's the correct way of saying it now, either hearing wise or in a wheelchair or something. And my first reaction as a kid was kind of, ew, they're not totally, 100%. And that's just what we're brought up with, the stigma of, it's, we all have our body issues, it doesn't matter if they're obvious on the outside or on the inside. We all have issues with dealing with our bodies. And so, having to wear hearing aids has also made me grow up in a way and realize that, everybody's, fighting the fight, being alive and doing the best they can. And I haven't personally had any stigmas. It hasn't affected my career. I'm at the sort of the apex of my career right now as far as orchestras hiring me and stuff. And I mean, I haven't not gotten hired because the article came out, let's put it that way. So I'm personally not feeling a stigma. But I think the more the stigma is not about you personally wearing hearing aids, but having to go get them. Like I said, these musicians who are in denial, I think they feel like, something's going to happen if all of a sudden my colleagues see me wearing hearing aids.
Now, one of the interesting things about rock and pop bands now is the fact that they're not playing loudly anymore, and mostly because they're wearing in-ear monitors. So a lot of that has stopped. You don't need big amplifiers like you did because you're, in-ear monitors. So
So you mean the whole level is less now as a result?
Oh, yeah. A stage level is way, way down. And you can tweak what you're hearing in terms of, the mix. So you're just hearing what you need instead of the things that you don't need. I know when I played in bands, it was always the cymbals. Drummer would hit the cymbals that go right through me. And I think that's why I have tinnitus today.
Oh, do you have that constantly?
Yeah. But I've gotten to the point where I don't notice it unless I talk about it, somebody else talks about it, I read about it, then it's like, oh yeah, it's there. Otherwise it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I have it as well. That's one of the side effects of the otosclerosis that I have, that it's there constantly. The good news about hearing aids is you don't notice it when you're wearing them because everything else is being so amplified. When you take your hearing aids out at night, oh my God, it's like the cicadas attack. It's when you notice it.
I think there's another thing about hearing aids, especially high-end ones. I'm not going to call it a stigma, but maybe it's a impediment for adoption, and that's the cost.
Yeah, I know.
I know when my mother, who was, in her 90s, when she got hearing aids, it was $7,000 or something. It's a lot of money.
That's pretty much what they are now. A good high-end pair is around $7,000. You can get again, it depends on how many bells and whistles you get. You don't have to get the high end. That'll cost more like $5,000 or something. But yeah, $7,000 is kind of the price. And it is a lot. And Medicare doesn't pay for it. Some insurances are starting to pay for it. I think Kaiser is now starting to pay part of it. But that's also a reason why these over-the-counter things are coming out now. The government has approved over-the-counter and much lower cost hearing aids, which is great because it'll help people. And a lot of people also get their hearing aids at Costco, which also is about a third the price. The issue with that is the follow-up that, not to put Costco down, but I don't think they are as, you can't go see them all the time if something's wrong, like I can with my audiologist who can then tweak it. It's not as standard policy there. So these, and also for a musician who has to be able to hear what they're doing, also be able to hear what your colleagues are doing. That's the whole trip. I was mentioning about making my stupid joke about not wanting to really hear what the conductor has to say.
Yeah, but you have to hear what everybody else is playing though.
Exactly. So, and being a flute player, you're on the top of the heap. And so you have to, blend and play in tune with the oboists and the clarinets and the bassoons and the horns. So you really have to have, 360 hearing and stuff. And that's something that the high-end hearing aids, even though they're really expensive, do really well. But again, these hearing aids last between 3 and 5 years, and, a $7,000 investment so that you can actually hear, I see that as just crucial and not, an extra expense. But yeah, I can see that could stop some people. But they don't need to get the best of the best. They can start out with something that's a little cheaper and see if it works. And
I didn't realize that they wore out. What wears out? Is it a battery?
They don't wear out. So yeah, they do wear out, and you have to send them back. It depends. The ones I have have rechargeable batteries, so that's much better. Sometimes when you have to keep on putting batteries in every week, something can break down with the little thing that holds the batteries in, and it's like technology. Everything improves. I mean, you don't necessarily have to get them every 3 to 5 years, but since I'm such a upgrade slut anyway in my life, if something better is coming out and it's going to help my hearing, I'm definitely going to go for it for sure. But yeah, it's like any Apple product or laptop or anything. It's built for a certain amount of wear and tear, and then you got to get it repaired.
What's it like wearing headphones?
That's a really, really good question. I've gone through a lot of headphones. I started out with Bose noise canceling headphones because I fly around a lot for my career. But now, since I have hearing loss, I don't really need noise canceling. I just take my hearing aids.
Yeah, right.
I just take my hearing aids out. I have natural noise canceling. Some headphones I can put directly over my hearing aids, and I turn the hearing aid volume down a lot, and then it works really good. Other ones, it still feeds back. So I have to make, it's tricky. I try not to listen so much with headphones anymore, because the issue with headphones is if you're not wearing hearing aids, you have to turn up the volume a lot to be able to hear clearly. And of course, I know that's not good for my ears, even though it sounds to them that it's not loud. So I don't listen as much on headphones now as I used to, that's for sure. But a lot of other people like having the sounds directly in their hearing aid. So you can stream your phone into it. You can stream all your music into it. But I don't like doing that personally because the quality is nowhere near as good as the headphones you're wearing or the headphones that I would be wearing.
I was just going to ask if you could do that, but
yeah, you can. A lot of people like that because it makes life simpler, especially on phone calls. You don't have to use a speaker anymore. You can hear directly. But the quality of the music is very tinny. These aren't really built as headphones. They're built with microphones to amplify the sound into your ear, but it's not the kind of quality headphones that you want to really be listening to music with.
What was it like getting fitted for them? And I ask this because I've been fitted for in-ears several times, and I could not get used to them no matter what. Even though they were custom fitted for me, I just couldn't get used to it.
So those are the monitors you were talking about? Yeah. Well, initially, most people don't get custom ear molds, they're called, for hearing aids. They come with sort of standard plugs at the end with different sizes, kind of like, AirPods, that kind of thing. But I was never comfortable with those. I always had to stick them really far into my ears, and there was still feedback with my flute. So my audiologist suggested exactly what you were talking about, custom ear molds where they put that kind of goo in you, pull it out. It works great for me. I know some people have problems. There are also different ones you can get. You can get like full ear ones. You can get half ear ones. You can get quarter ear ones. So I'm not sure which ones you get, but that's something, if you're interested, I would investigate. Because full ear ones are a little more tricky to deal with because, it's like there's a bunch of cotton in your ear. Were you feeling like it wouldn't stay in, or you just couldn't hear well?
They wouldn't stay in, or they felt uncomfortable to me.
And it definitely took me a week or so to get used to them, for sure. Absolutely. But now I recommend them to everybody because they're molded to your particular ear. And if they fit really well, there's no feedback coming off them. And for me, they work the best.
You can't even see them.
Well, I can show you if you want.
No, well, you don't need to, but I'm just saying, I wouldn't know if you wouldn't have said anything, which is a good thing.
Exactly.
Then, of course, there's less of a stigma if that's the case because it doesn't really stick out to somebody. But here's the thing, though. because I'm just thinking of the other side of this, because in-ears are so prevalent for musicians, it's not such a big deal seeing something stuck out of your ear these days.
I agree. And also people, I think one little kid came up to me and asked me if I was working for the CIA because they saw it in my, which was a really fun comment. Yeah, I agree with you because people see them all the time and it definitely helps. And of course, as things get smaller, unless you can't really see it that much, older hearing aids, they have these huge things, behind your ears. So yeah, as the technology gets better and everything gets reduced, the stigma is certainly coming off. But I totally agree with you that we're so used to seeing people with things in their ears that, especially now with the AirPod stuff, it's like I think the stigma is gone away. At least, like I said, I haven't experienced any of the prejudice myself yet. So I'm hoping that it's gone away for everybody. The stigma is just, again, as we've talked about, getting analyzed, realizing there's a problem, accepting there's a problem, going to an audiologist and just dealing with it. That's the hardest stigma I think that musicians have, especially classical ones. I think we're used to, rock and rollers, they lost their hearing, they need to go get hearing aids kind of thing. But, we're these great classical musicians, we're not supposed to have anything wrong with this kind of thing. And I think that's the stigma. So do a lot of your colleagues have hearing loss from the rock world, kind of?
Yeah, they do. Two of my best friends that I've played with over the years wear hearing aids now. One, and both of them are pretty successful musicians that are still playing. Hasn't been a problem for them.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you a personal question? How did you get involved in these podcasts and stuff?
I was on a podcast it was a round table of audio geeks. And I was on it as a panel member, and a listener wrote in and said, you should have your own podcast. And I said, I don't have time for that. He said, look, I teach people how to do this. All you have to do is do the interview, and I will do the rest. So for the first 100 episodes, that's kind of what happened until he got too busy, and then I took over everything.
Wow. How long have you been doing it?
Well, this is episode 517.
Oh, my gosh.
It's once a week. So it's,
that's incredible.
Yeah, it's 10 years.
Wow, congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah, thanks. But the only reason why I do it, and occasionally it hits the top 20 in iTunes and, top 1% in podcasts and things like that, which I could care less about. All I care is talking to people like you because it opens up my horizons. It's new things I don't know about, and it's, nice people. It's always a good thing.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're doing this. I mean, I'm glad you're doing it for everybody. I mean, it's a great thing to do. World
Hearing Day just passed, and it would have been nice to have this for March 3rd, but how would you celebrate that? Is that something worth celebrating? I guess it is. Quite
honestly, I didn't even know it existed. So you're the first person to tell me this. I mean, I guess for myself personally, every day is World Hearing Day because I'm just so happy that there is a solution for this. If I was living in, Beethoven's time, there would have been no solution. They had those huge, hearing horns.
Yeah.
Even that, he started noticing his hearing loss in his early 20s, and he went to all these ear specialists in Vienna. And though they couldn't analyze it, as I got analyzed, and they said, basically, you're going to lose your hearing. So it was a gradual decline. He eventually had to stop playing in public. He would always play his piano concertos in public, and he had to stop because he couldn't hear anymore. And in the last decade or so of his life, he was stone deaf. He couldn't hear a sound. So I mean, that's tragic, but that's how it was back then. So I mean, I'm thankful every day that the technology exists that helped me.
Now, was your hearing gradually declining, or did you just notice that it was less suddenly?
That's a good question. I think I just noticed it was less. I mean, as you age, your hearing declines. That's something my audiologist is always telling me. I said, is this not going to get any worse? Please tell me it's not going to get any worse as I get older. Because part of the evolution of autosclerosis is that it does get worse as you get older. But he says there's always an age decline in your hearing. So he doesn't know. My hearing has been very stable over the last 5 years. I get tested every year just to make sure.
Last question, Stephen. What's the best piece of advice that you've either received or maybe you learned along the way?
As far as my hearing loss?
No, it could be about anything.
Well, the old standard from my hippie days, be here now, is a really good piece of advice. It's something that I try to deal with all the time, not obsessing about what happened in the past, not worrying too much about what your future is going to be like, and just being here now and being the best human you can be here now, being the best musician, being the best, husband I can be, best friend I can be right here now. Obviously, it's easy to say with our complicated, horrific world situation as it is right now. But I try to just reach a balance. I deal with people all the time with my performance and my teaching. And I just try to be the best I can be to everybody, to help them and to teach the best I can, to play the best I can. And having hearing aids is a miracle. It really is. I don't use that word very often in my life, but it definitely is a miracle to be able to, it's amazing, these little units, what they can do. I mean, the computerized, it's phenomenal what they're capable of doing these days. So I'm happy that exists. And thank you for telling me about World Hearing Day. I didn't know anything about it. I appreciate the tip.
You can find out more about Stephen at stephenschultz.net. That's Stephen, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Schultz, S-C-H-U-L-T-Z, Stephen Schultz, all one word, .net. And you can find out more about World Hearing Day at who.int/campaigns/world-hearing-day. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news when you sign up for my newsletter at bobbyowsinski.com. There you'll also find out about openings for my latest online classes and special events. That's bobbyowsinski.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to bobbyoinnercircle.com, where you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Apple Music, Mixcloud, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, and Podbean. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyoinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.